All right. So this week, mental skills, we're talking about positive self-talk. First of all, what is self-talk?
It's when you talk to yourself.
Very good. I knew that. That's always the first answer in this class, by the way. Is self-talk is talking to yourself. Well, what does that mean, talking to yourself?
Encouraging yourself.
Could be encouraging yourself.
Like getting mad at yourself.
Could be getting mad at yourself, right? But there are, aside from positive and negative, we know that there's positive self-talk, negative self-talk. What are the two different types of self-talk? Apart from those two.
Internal and external.
Internal and external.
What's that?
I'm glad you asked, Dennis. So external is pretty obvious, right? People think you're crazy some of the time if you're talking to yourself externally. Right? What are you doing? I can't believe you did that. Why did you get that flying in there? That was ridiculous. That was the worst tennis of my life. What are you doing? That's external self-talk, and that's very negative. Right? But you could have externals. Hey, you got this. Come on, this one, this point. Let's focus. Come on, let's go. That might be an example of positive self-talk, but that's also external. So what do we mean by internal? Because the internal is just as important, if not more important, than the external. Yes?
Like what you think about yourself?
So what you think, what having this conversation. If you've never thought about it, we all have a voice in here. Some of us may have more than one, which can be a problem, but we have at least one internal voice. It's that voice that talks to you all the time. Sometimes you need to talk to it. Sometimes it's just kind of uninvited, right? You're sitting there in a test in school, and it's like, I think it's A, but is it A or should I put B? Well, I don't know, but C makes sense. Like, it's that internal monologue you have with yourself, right? We all have that voice. Sometimes it's really helpful, sometimes it's not. We're going to talk a little bit today about how both the external and the internal has an effect, especially with athletes and especially, obviously, for us, with intense. So, we talked about confidence last week, and we talked about how self-talk this week can affect that confidence. If you are doing a good job and you have lots of positive self-talk, what do you think that does for your confidence?
Increase.
It increases confidence, right? You're talking to yourself, hopefully things are going well. Right? It's very easy when things are going well to be positive. On the flip side, you start beating yourself up. That's the term I like to use with you guys. You beat yourself up. Yeah, okay. You beat yourself up verbally, not physically, verbally. And you give yourself a hard time and you start saying all these negative things. What do you think that does for your confidence in a spiraling sort of way? Well, there's got to be more than just Dennis contributing today. Come on.
I think
What's wrong with Dennis?
Increase.
All right, so obviously, the more you're negative to yourself, the more it decreases. Would you say there is a lot of negative self-talk or not very much negative self-talk in junior tennis?
A lot.
A lot. A crazy amount. Not just in USTA competitions, but practices as well. Now again, some of you ladies at the back, I don't get to work with you on the tennis court, so I can't speak to how you are on the court. 2, 3, 4, 5. I have experience with all the gentlemen in this room, and I don't think there's a single person here who doesn't at least have some issues with negative self-talk. Would you say it's a natural, normal thing to talk to yourself negatively if you've made a mistake?
Yeah.
Of course it is, right? That's what we're trained. Positive, if we do something well, that's positive. If we do something badly, that's negative. But we're going to try and figure out today, especially watching a couple of videos, looking at examples of how the best athletes in the world can stay pretty positive when it comes to self-talk. What happens, do you think, if you say something to yourself enough? If you say something to yourself enough, either positive or negative, what tends to happen?
It's like you fake it till you make it. Like it eventually comes true.
Okay, so Jack's talking about something called faking it till you make it, or basically saying something or acting a certain way until it becomes true. Another way of saying is act as if. Act as if you're the most confident person in the room. Act as if you're the best tennis player on the court.
Like if you
Right.
keep saying you're terrible, you're going to be terrible.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, a prophecy is something that's forecasted to come true, right? But if you keep telling yourself how bad you are, you're going to play bad tennis. If you keep telling yourself how bad your backhand is, do you think your backhand's going to be good?
No.
No!
Mine already is terrible.
See? You've established in your mind that your backhand is terrible.
Yes. Not.
But it's amazing, right? So we're sitting here, or we're in this room, we're talking about our mental state, but we're also some of the strokes that we play on a tennis court perhaps. And you have already determined that your backhand's awful. Just by saying that, there's no way on earth you could believe you hit a good backhand.
Well, sometimes, maybe, rarely I hit a pretty good backhand.
Okay.
Once in a while I hit a winner, maybe once or twice a match.
Okay.
Even if I get like an easy ball.
Perfect. So at the moment, you don't have a whole lot of confidence in that backhand. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to have a different perspective. Even if your backhand is not the way you want it to be yet, we have to start talking in a positive way to develop that backhand. Because from a physical perspective and a technical perspective, you're working on that. But if you go out there with a negative attitude towards any aspect of your tennis, I don't care how well you hit it in practice, in a match, it's going to be awful. I'm telling you right now, as much as some people, and I'm not including people sitting in this room right now, as much as people don't think the mental side of the game is that important, it is the most important part of the game of tennis. And if you don't believe me, watch some of the Australian Open and listen to the commentators and listen to the pros themselves talk about how important the mental side of the game is.
Yeah, you showed me the video last night about it.
Yeah, I try and, there's a particular video where the commentators, and John McEnroe was one of them, they were talking about how important working on your mental skills and having a mental coach is. There aren't that many people in this area, in this part of the world, that are working on their mental skills when it comes to tennis. We are, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll give us an advantage. Had a question, Jack?
Like, weren't they talking about, like, during the Osaka match, how important it is for her to keep cool, like, in preparation for the against Gaff or Goff?
Coco Gauff, yeah. So here's the problem that Osaka has had. She was the underdog, right, for a long time. Like, she wasn't expected to win against the top 5 in the world. She wasn't supposed to beat Serena Williams. Then she, not out of nowhere, but she won a couple of tournaments. I think she won Indian Wells. Then she won the US Open, the Australian Open.
In a row.
All in a row, right? And now all of a sudden she's world number 1, and now everyone expects her to win. And so all of a sudden she's facing pressure that she hasn't had to face. And so a lot of her, if you listen to interviews she's had, or if you read things that have been spoken about her, she had a tough time dealing with that pressure. And as a result, she was a lot more negative, both emotionally, mentally, in terms of her body language. She throws a racket, which she never used to. She used to laugh and smile on the court. So she's had a tough time dealing with that. At least now she understands that and she's working on it. All right, so without further ado, let's watch the first video. All right, so for some of you that have finished, obviously we're working on this, as someone put it, stinking thinking, or basically your mindset and how positive you are before you play and when you play a good match and or a bad match. So let's focus first on the performance that was not good for you guys. Does anyone, first of all, what were you thinking before that match? Now we can look back at it. Yeah.
Like, I didn't really know the person, so I wasn't really sure what was going to happen.
Okay.
So I was like at a 5.
Okay. So you were at a 5, but you were kind of a little apprehensive because you don't know the person, unsure of things. Good. I'll come back to you in a second, right? So what were you thinking, Ryan, before you played?
Well, during warm-ups, I thought he was not a good player, and thought it'd be an easy win. I was wrong.
So you were already not trying to, but you were already formulating in your mind, oh, this guy doesn't look that good, maybe,
Yeah.
you know, it shouldn't be a tough match. Hang on a second. Yes, young lady.
I was thinking that I didn't warm up and that I wasn't really in the mood to play tennis.
Okay, so you didn't even have a chance to warm up properly, and maybe you weren't in the right frame of mind to play.
I felt pretty good
Okay.
about like the match. I played the kid and beaten him before,
Mhm.
and I played him a couple weeks back in doubles, and he wasn't that good.
Okay.
And yeah.
So you were pretty positive before. So we've had a variety of different responses. So some ranging from positive to pretty negative.
I just have one other thing. I felt this was like more before you actually got to the court. Like during warm-ups, I said a similar thing to mine, but like I didn't warm up my serve enough, and then that like.
I'm forgetting how to spell.
And then during the match, I kept telling myself that my serve sucked,
Okay.
and it kept getting progressively worse, so I lost the match.
So,
Even though.
and by the way, when it says shortly before the start of your match, that again is open to interpretation. You were thinking before you got on court, some people were talking about during their warm-up. But it's interesting you say that when you were getting out there, you didn't warm up your serve enough, and then you said for the whole match, you were talking about how bad your serve was?
Yeah, pretty much like after the first service game, I was just like, I kept telling myself that my serve was really bad, even though I was like beating him when he was serving. Like, I kept losing the service game.
So, show of hands, who was thinking negatively before the match of your worst performance?
What?
Who was thinking negatively before your match? But this is the worst match. Okay. Who was thinking positively?
I was thinking in the middle.
Okay. So it's a real mix, right? Some were positive, some were negative before you start, which is always a tough position to be in, because it's really tough to turn it around. So let's now move on to during the match. How many people were thinking negatively during the match?
I was thinking in the middle.
Okay. But keep in mind, Dennis, this is your worst recent performance. Not your best, this is your worst recent performance. So, and again, you could be thinking in the middle. Most people, when they consider what they tie to negative performance, right,
Wait.
are going to think really negatively during the course of the event.
Wait, I was thinking negative.
Okay. So it's, from the matches that I can recall as a junior, there were 3 or 4 matches that I still remember to this day where I was really negative and I just wasn't feeling it, and it was just the way that I acted and the way I thought was negative the whole way along. And it was directly tied, for me, as to how I played. All right, let's flip that though. Right, so for those of you that can recall a great recent performance you had, again, it didn't have to be a win, but a great recent performance, what were you guys thinking before you played? Lucia?
I was just thinking that, like, I know him really well. I should just go out there and play, and hopefully I'll play good.
Okay, so a nice positive start. Alex?
It was actually right after my worst match, so, and in my worst match I always double faulted, so I was worried I was going to double fault again
Okay.
the whole match.
So, funnily enough, before your best performance, you were worried that there could be a negative. Gary?
I was playing against someone who was definitely better than me.
Okay.
And then, so like, I thought I was gonna lose, but like, when I played people that are better than me, I usually play better.
So you didn't feel the pressure, the guy's better than you, so you went out there.
I still thought I was gonna lose, but
Yeah.
I was just like, I didn't try.
But it was nice to have the lack of pressure in that situation. Yes, Jack?
I felt like I was like, I just felt like I was a good tennis player. I had confidence.
So again, you're leading with confidence, you're going out there and competing, and you're feeling good before you get out on the court. That counts for a lot. Brian, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I went out there. I never played this guy before,
Okay.
so I just told myself to just go out there and play my best.
Okay. So you've never played the person before,
Yeah.
but again, so everything we're talking about, generally speaking, is a positive mindset and positive talk to yourself before you go out there and play. So I would be very surprised if any of you then said you were negative during your best performance. So during the match, a little bit, right, so you have waves, but overall, remember this is overall. Okay? How positive, how negative, would you argue, show of hands again, during your best performance, not before, not after, but during, show of hands who was pretty much positive the way through their great performance. Most of you. Most of you. Who was feeling negative during their best performance?
Also me.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I was like winning, but then I have really low self-confidence, so I thought I was gonna lose my lead, so I kept telling myself not to lose my lead. So like I was pretty negative.
But that's very interesting because it can still happen. Most of you were positive during your best performance. That doesn't mean you're wrong, by the way. It doesn't mean you're wrong to feel negative, even though in hindsight you can look back and say, yeah, you know what, I did pretty well. Here's what we know. Self-talk, either positive or negative, there is a correlation to how well you play or how poorly you play. We have to figure out, do we play better or worse because of the way we talk to ourselves? Or do we talk to ourselves because of the way we play? Now, both, right? But what we're going to get to the stage of, if you can control, or as Jack put it earlier on, right, fake it till you make it. If you can control how positively you talk to yourself, even when the going gets tough, even when you're not playing well, could you imagine being able to be positive in a really tough, typically negative situation, what that could do for your game?
Improve it.
Really improve.
It could really improve it, right? You might win matches that right now you're not winning because you're able to deal with these negative thoughts, because that's what self-talk is, basically the thoughts. The internal self-talk are the thoughts that you have. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can turn those negative initial thoughts into more positive things. I'm actually going to ask you to put, now I can see everyone doodling nicely, I'm going to ask you to put your clipboards underneath your chair. Okay, and what we're actually going to do is we're going to watch a second video, and then we're going to talk about ways in which to increase our positive thinking.
But when things don't go so well, that's when it can kind of start to slip off a little bit, and that's where your self-talk can start to derail you if you're not careful. So examples would be questioning your preparation or how well you're going to perform, telling yourself you've got really strong opponents today and you don't know if you're going to actually be able to compete with them, telling yourself that other people get better opportunities than you do. All of these kind of negative thoughts, all of this kind of negative self-talk going around in your head can really kind of put you off when you actually need to be really focused and talking to yourself in a positive and optimistic way. So the first step to developing more helpful and functional self-talk is to identify any trends in what you currently say to yourself. So whether it's at training, whether it's when you're performing, whether it's at home, wherever. If you can identify anything that you say to yourself that's not particularly helpful, all right, then you've got a few options and a few strategies that we can put in place to try and deal with that and make it more functional. If it's things that you say to yourself away from training and away from performances, then you can maybe use a technique called countering, okay? As humans, we're kind of quick to jump on a negative explanation for what's going on, or we're quick to be overly self-critical. So for example, you might not be getting the opportunities that you want, and you might be thinking that's because the coach doesn't like you, okay? Countering involves looking at that explanation for what it is, a bit of a negative judgment, a bit of a snap decision, and trying to come up with, or trying to counter it with, another explanation for what you're going through and for what's going on, okay? So maybe the coach doesn't like you, but probably not all that realistic. So perhaps it's more that he wants to see a bit more from you, or she wants you to have a bit more game time before you can actually go out there and step up to the next squad or step up to the next opportunity. So we try and counter our original unrealistic explanation with a more realistic, more functional, perhaps more accurate one that's going to help us to get better and improve rather than just drag us down and make us feel worse. If it's something that you're telling yourself in the lead up to a performance or a big event, then maybe you can reframe that. If you've got a lot of people that are coming to watch you perform, for example, you might be telling yourself, that's a load of people that could see me fail, could embarrass myself quite a lot. If you can reframe that and look at the fact that you've got a lot of people coming to see you as a chance for you to show how hard you've been working, a chance for you to show how good you are, then you're immediately going to be thinking more functionally and more optimistically about that upcoming performance. If you find that you're actually talking down to yourself when you're performing, you can use a technique called thought stopping. Alright? So in most sports, your attention needs to be fully focused in the moment on what's going on around you in order to perform at your absolute best. And if you're talking negatively to yourself whilst you're trying to perform, you're going to be disrupting that focus and you're not going to be performing as well as you might, and that might lead to more negative self-talk, and the cycle just goes over and over and over until you've had one of the worst days at the office ever. So you can use a thought-stopping technique to try and block out those negative thoughts, get your attention back onto what it should be on. Thought-stopping is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a really quick technique that you can use when you're actually performing. As soon as you recognise that you're talking negatively to yourself, use a little cue to stop that in its tracks and focus back on the match or back on the event. Alright, so that could be a visual cue, like imagining a bright red stop sign. It could be a physical action, like clapping your hands together, or even just flicking an elastic band on your wrist. Anything that's going to draw your attention to the fact that you're talking negatively and remind you to refocus back on your event. Alright guys, there you have it. Stay aware of your self-talk, and if you find that it's not helpful, it's not functional, then either counter it, reframe it, or just stop it altogether. Don't trash talk yourself into a poor performance. Alright, my updated web...
Okay. So a fellow Englishman over there, slightly different accent to me though. He's from up north, I think. However, he talks. It's not, guys. I think you realise by now the last few minutes of each class is where we come up with a resolution. We come up with what we need to be doing. Right? There are a lot of you sitting here right now where we really need to work on your negative self-talk.
Thank you.
It's not a compliment, Dennis. It's something that affects all of us, even if it's not outward. I would argue that the first instinct when things are not going well is to have negative self-talk, even if it's that dialogue inside. What are the three things that gentleman talks about we can do in order to deal with negative self-talk?
Wasn't here, but I think I can get it.
Well, you weren't here,
Stop it.
so
Frame it, and then something else.
okay.
Counter it.
Now go back. Countering it, obviously coming up with something in place of, right, to counteract that negative talk. Reframing it, which is basically taking a situation and then looking at it from a different perspective. And thirdly, what was the last one?
Thought block. Stop it. Thought block.
Thought stopping. Very good.
Thoughts.
Very close. Both of you, between the two of you, had the right answer. Thought stopping. So I want to focus a little bit on thought stopping because this is something very specifically that you can do on the tennis court in between points. How long do you have between points in tennis?
25 seconds.
25 seconds. Sometimes that's a little different for Grand Slams versus the men's and women's tour, but generally speaking, it's accepted 25 seconds. Is 25 seconds a long time?
No.
Kind of.
Doesn't seem it, but during it, for between tennis points, it can be. 25 seconds can actually be plenty of time. Yes, Lucia, you want to answer?
Don't you have like 25 seconds with your serve? So you have to serve in 25
Technically,
seconds.
you're supposed to begin the motion. A lot of people, the motion actually starts when the racket moves. So the bouncing is still included in the 25 seconds. That's why sometimes Nadal and Djokovic get in trouble, right? But once they stop the bouncing and they start the service motion, then the point has officially begun. It's not the time until the ball goes in play. It's the service motion. Yeah.
What if they start the motion and then like on purpose because they didn't like spend enough time getting prepared? They like threw the ball up and let it drop and then just like bounce the ball.
It's a great question. I knew you were going to ask that for some reason. Then technically they're okay. Now, if they did that every point, then the people would be suspicious, right? So the funny thing is, we were taught this one tactic. I worked with a sports psychologist many years ago before it was even really done, especially in junior tennis. And he said, in order, if you need more time, he used to have us go up to the line, start bouncing the ball, and bounce the ball off our toe, so the ball would roll. If you can do it right, you can bounce the ball. By the way, I'm not encouraging you to do this in a match.
I would do it by accident.
Yes.
Why?
Yes, some people
Yes,
do it by
I
accident,
agree.
right? But to your point, sometimes you just need a little bit more time. So if you were to throw the ball up, let it bounce and start again, then that's okay. You just obviously can't do that every single point. So, 25 seconds in between points. How are we going to work on thought stopping? So, I don't know how heavily you were listening to this, but this is really where it counts. So, all of a sudden, you've just dumped a second serve in the net. You've just double faulted. You're facing great point. That negative thought comes into your head. Oh my God, your serve is so bad, you always double fault at the wrong time.
True.
Okay, that might be true. Might be true. But right now, in that moment, you can't be thinking like that. So, in this model of thought stopping, what's the first thing you got to do? Literally, you having the negative thought. What have you got to do?
Like say something else. What is it like? Fiddle with your strings, or just try to start the point and clear your head.
Okay, so that's part of the process, but we're not quite there. First thing we've got to do when these negative thoughts are coming around. Yes, Chad?
I recognize them.
So you recognize them hopefully almost immediately, and then how did this gentleman talk about stopping them?
Like thinking about a cue.
A cue. Does everyone know what a cue is?
Yeah.
A line.
It could be a line, cue cards, it could be a visual thing,
Q-tips.
right? No, not cue tips, that's
Or
something
it
else.
could be like an action, like
Could be an action.
you said, like pulling a rubber band or like doing something like quick that will like refocus you on the match and sort of like
So you could almost raise your hand to yourself, or
Yeah.
for me, I used to think of a traffic light. I used to think of a red light as a traffic light. Right? Some visual or physical or something that's going to get you to stop, and then you can start reframing it, or you can start relaxing and breathing and fiddling with the strings, and then maybe once you've stopped it, then talk to yourself about how you're going to overcome it. Okay, all right, I know I double faulted. Where are you going to put this first serve? Let's make this first serve count. Right? But if you allow that negativity and that negative self-talk to carry on, what do you think is going to happen? Break point down after a double fault.
Double fault.
There's a very good chance you could double fault again. All right, guys, listen. We are going to continue with self-talk for the first part of the next session. Okay? Don't go anywhere, Jack. Sit down. And then obviously I think we're going to be talking about positive body language as well.